You know that feeling when you walk into a bank, the hushed silence, the polished counters, the sense of absolute security. It's a place designed to feel impenetrable, a fortress built to protect what matters most. We've all seen the movies, the suave thieves, the intricate plans, the flawless execution. But what if I told you that some of the most successful bank heists in American history didn't involve high-tech gadgets or slick disguises? What if instead they were built on ideas so strange, so utterly bizarre, that it's almost unbelievable they worked at all? These aren't stories ripped from a Hollywood script. They're real-life tales of ingenuity, absurdity, and sometimes pure luck. And today, we're going to explore 31 of the weirdest bank heists that actually succeeded. Picture this, a heist pulled off with nothing more than a note written on a banana, or a robber who made his escape on a children's bicycle. These aren't fictional scenarios, they're real moments in criminal history that challenge everything we think we know about pulling off the perfect crime. In a world where we expect bank robbers to be masterminds, it's the odd, the unexpected, and the downright peculiar that often leave the biggest mark. These stories aren't just about stealing money, they're about the human spirit's endless capacity for creativity, even when it's channeled in the wrong direction. They remind us that sometimes reality is far stranger and more fascinating than anything fiction could dream up. So get ready to step into a world where the rules of crime are rewritten by imagination, audacity, and a touch of madness. This journey will take us through decades of American history, uncovering heists that range from the clever to the comical, from the bold to the baffling. Each story is a testament to the fact that when it comes to pulling off the impossible, sometimes the weirdest idea is the one that works. You're about to discover how ordinary people did extraordinary things in the most unconventional ways and walked away with the money. Let's begin. Our journey into the bizarre begins not inside a bank vault but 30,000 feet above the ground. In the annals of American crime, few stories are as legendary or as perplexing as the one that kicked off our list. On the afternoon of November 24, 1971, a man who would become known to the world as D.B. Cooper purchased a one-way ticket for Northwest Orient Airlines Flight 305 from Portland to Seattle. He was described as calm, polite, and wearing a business suit with a black tie. He looked like any other passenger, but he was about to execute a heist so audacious it would capture the nation's imagination for decades. After the flight took off, he handed a note to a flight attendant. She initially thought he was giving her his phone number, but the note was far more serious. It simply stated that he had a bomb in his briefcase. He opened the case just enough for her to see a mess of wires and red sticks, and then he made his demand, $200,000 in cash and 4 parachutes. This was not a robbery of currency from a bank's till, but of negotiable instruments, specifically unmarked $20 bills whose serial numbers had been recorded. In the eyes of the law and the banking system, it was absolutely a bank heist, just one that happened to occur mid-air. The authorities agreed to his terms. When the plane landed in Seattle, he released the 36 passengers in exchange for the money and the parachutes. Then, with a refueled plane and only the crew aboard, he ordered the pilots to take off again, heading for Mexico City. Somewhere over the dense, rainy forests of the Pacific Northwest, somewhere between Portland and Reno, D.B. Cooper did the unthinkable. He lowered the rear staircase of the Boeing 727, and into the pitch-black night and freezing wind he jumped. He vanished seemingly into thin air with the equivalent of $1.3 million in today's money. Despite one of the largest and most extensive manhunts in FBI history, no trace of him was found for years. In 1980, a young boy digging on a beach along the Columbia River unearthed a decaying package containing 294 of the $20 bills, their serial numbers confirming they were part of the ransom. But of Cooper himself there was no sign. No body, no parachute, no briefcase. The case remains the only unsolved skyjacking in American history. What makes this heist so uniquely weird and successful wasn't just the method, it was the sheer, absolute mystery of it all. He wasn't a violent terrorist, he was a seemingly ordinary man who pulled off an extraordinary crime and then disappeared without a trace. He became a folk hero to some, a symbol of the ultimate getaway. He successfully robbed the system not by breaking into a vault, but by jumping out of a plane into legend. While the mystery of D.B. Cooper was still unfolding in the Pacific Northwest, a different kind of criminal precision was being perfected on the other side of the continent. This story doesn't involve a dramatic leap into the unknown, but rather a slow, methodical crawl beneath the known. It's the tale of a crew so renowned for their clockwork efficiency that they earned a legendary nickname, the Stopwatch Gang. Their most infamous operation, a stunning tunnel heist in 1972, demonstrated that sometimes the most direct route to a vault isn't through the door but straight through the earth. The target was the Security Pacific Bank in Laguna Niguel, California. The mastermind was a man named Lionel Wright, but the operation was the brainchild of the gang's core, three Canadians, Paddy Mitchell, Stephen Reed, and Lionel Wright himself. Their modus operandi was all in the name. They planned their robberies with military precision, timing every single movement down to the second with a stopwatch, ensuring they were in and out before any alarm could even be considered a real threat. For this job, however, patience was the real currency. They began by renting a vacant shop unit right next door to the bank. To any passerby, they were just new tenants moving in, hauling in boxes and supplies. But those boxes didn't contain stock for a store. They were filled with digging tools, shoring timber, and a seemingly endless supply of determination. For weeks, under the cover of night, the men worked in shifts, painstakingly digging a tunnel from the floor of their rented shop directly toward the bank's vault. They disposed of the dirt by bagging it and secretly scattering it elsewhere, leaving no trace of their subterranean project. The tunnel itself was a marvel of criminal engineering. It was narrow, cramped, and claustrophobic, shored up with wooden planks to prevent a collapse. They had to navigate around utility lines and foundations, all while keeping the operation completely silent to avoid detection. The final obstacle was the vault floor, a thick slab of reinforced concrete. Using specialized drills and saws, they finally broke through, creating a hole just large enough for a man to slip through. On the day of the heist, their planning paid off perfectly. While the citizens of Laguna Niguel went about their business above ground, the Stopwatch Gang dropped into the vault from below. With their stopwatch running, they quickly and efficiently looted safe deposit boxes, stuffing bags with cash, jewelry, and bonds. They were in and out in minutes, escaping back through their tunnel with over $200,000 in loot, a fortune at the time. By the time bank employees discovered the gaping hole in the vault floor the next morning, the gang was long gone, their rented storefront abandoned without a clue. The sheer audacity of the plan was breathtaking. They didn't need masks or guns. They simply bypassed every single security measure the bank had in place by going underneath them all. It was a quiet, patient, and brilliantly executed crime that proved even the most secure rooms have a fundamental weakness: the ground they're built on. Moving from the meticulous tunneling of the Stopwatch Gang, we journey to a heist defined not by its silence, but by its shocking spectacle. A crime that weaponized one of the most trusted symbols of goodwill itself. Just 2 days before Christmas in 1927, the small oil boomtown of Cisco, Texas, was bustling with holiday cheer. The streets were filled with shoppers, children were eagerly awaiting the arrival of Saint Nick, and the spirit of the season was in full swing. Which is exactly why what happened next was so utterly disorienting. A festive-looking group approached the First National Bank, a portly Santa Claus cheerfully ringing a bell, followed by several of his helpers dressed as elves. To everyone on the street, it was just a charming bit of holiday promotion. But the moment they stepped inside the bank, the festive illusion shattered. Santa Claus produced a pistol and the elves pulled out rifles. This was no charity event. It was a meticulously planned robbery, and the disguises were their perfect, sinister cover. The man inside the Santa suit was Marshal Ratliff, a local outlaw who knew the bank's layout. His elves were his 3 accomplices. They forced the bank's president and cashier to the vault, ordering them to fill sacks with over $12,000 in cash and another $50,000 in negotiable bonds. But the plan, so brilliant in its initial audacity, began to unravel almost immediately. A bank teller, seeing the robbery unfold, managed to slip out the back and ran into the street, screaming that Santa Claus was robbing the bank. At first, people thought it was a joke, a prank, but the sound of a single gunshot from inside the bank erased all doubt. The townspeople of Cisco were not about to let Santa get away with it. What followed was one of the most chaotic and dramatic manhunts the state had ever seen. As the bandits burst out of the bank and scrambled into their waiting getaway car, the entire town mobilized. Ordinary citizens grabbed their own rifles and opened fire. Police officers and local lawmen joined in, and a wild, rolling gunfight erupted through the streets of Cisco. The robber's car was riddled with bullets, its windows shot out, and one of the tires was blown. Desperate to escape the hail of gunfire, they carjacked a local family's vehicle, but even that was quickly disabled. They then hijacked a second car, but by this point, a posse of hundreds of armed civilians was in hot pursuit, following a trail of blood from one of the wounded bandits. The chase stretched for miles out into the frozen Texas countryside. The 4 men, still in their now tattered Santa and elf costumes, were finally cornered in a rocky gully. In the ensuing final shootout, 1 outlaw was killed, 2 were severely wounded and captured, and Marshal Ratliff, the criminal Santa, was eventually apprehended. He would later be broken out of jail by his brother, only to be recaptured and ultimately lynched by an angry mob. The sheer incongruity of the scene, a beloved holiday figure waving a gun, a Christmas robbery devolving into a bloody frontier-style battle, captivated the entire nation. It was a story that seemed ripped from a bizarre dime novel, yet it was all too real. This heist succeeded initially because of its brilliant, deceptive simplicity, leveraging a symbol of pure trust to bypass suspicion. But its legacy endures as a stark and strange reminder that even the most perfect disguise is useless without an equally perfect escape. From the chaotic spectacle of a Santa Claus shootout in Texas, we travel 70 years forward to a scheme that replaced festive disguises with a far more subtle, and some might argue cynical, form of deception. This heist, set in Erie, Pennsylvania, in the summer of 1997, didn't rely on force or fear. Instead, it weaponized nostalgia, community trust, and the utterly unimpeachable innocence of a childhood summer tradition, the lemonade stand. While most bank robbers look for a quick escape route, these criminals masterfully engineered a diversion that would stop the police from even getting started. The plan was as simple as it was brilliant. A group of thieves identified their target, a bank sitting comfortably in a quiet neighborhood. They knew that any robbery would trigger an immediate police response, and the main road leading to the bank was the fastest route for squad cars. Their solution: create a traffic jam, but not just any disruption. They needed one that would seem completely organic, unplanned, and would evoke sympathy rather than suspicion. So they enlisted the help of several local children, likely paying them a small sum to set up a lemonade stand. They positioned this stand at a crucial intersection along the primary route between the local police station and the bank. To any adult driving by, the scene was utterly charming. Kids were selling cups of lemonade for a few cents, waving signs, and enjoying a classic summer day. It was a picture of pure, small-town Americana. What the passing motorists didn't see was the calculated genius behind this heartwarming scene. the lemonade stand caused a predictable and constant bottleneck. Cars would slow down to look, some would even stop to make a purchase, and traffic began to back up. It created a natural, seemingly accidental gridlock. At a predetermined time, as the lemonade stand was doing its distracting work, the thieves moved on the bank. They entered, likely armed, and executed their robbery while the clock was ticking. But their clock wasn't counting down the alarm response. It was counting on the traffic snarl they had manufactured. When the bank's silent alarm was inevitably triggered, the police response was immediately hampered. Squad cars racing to the scene found themselves stuck in the very traffic jam the robbers had created. Precious minutes were lost as officers navigated around the slowdown, minutes that gave the thieves all the time they needed to complete the heist and make their escape cleanly. The true success of this scheme lies in its psychological manipulation. The criminals didn't just block a road, they blocked it with something no one would ever want to disrupt or question. Who would be so callous as to honk at children running a lemonade stand? Who would suspect that this symbol of youthful entrepreneurship was actually a sophisticated criminal tool? It was a distraction so perfect because it was completely invisible. The police weren't looking for a conspiracy, they were looking at kids trying to make $1. This heist succeeded because it exploited a fundamental trust in our community interactions. It proved that the most effective weapon in a criminal's arsenal isn't always a gun or a drill. Sometimes it's a 5-cent cup of lemonade and the powerful, unquestioning innocence it represents. But just when you think you've seen every possible type of criminal, the story takes a turn for the utterly unexpected. After tales of tunneling experts and lemonade stand distractions, we arrive at a heist that completely shatters the image of a typical bank robber. Forget ski masks and getaway cars. Picture instead a group of grandmothers, a pot of tea, and a well-thumbed copy of a classic novel. This is the bizarre and almost charming story of the book Club Bandits, a crew whose criminal operations were planned not in a smoky backroom, but in a sunny California living room during what appeared to be a perfectly ordinary book club meeting. The year was 2008, and over the course of several months, a series of banks in Southern California, from Orange County to Los Angeles, were hit by a lone, unusual robber. The perpetrator was described as an older, well-dressed woman, often wearing a wide-brimmed sun hat and sunglasses. She never brandished a weapon. Instead, she would calmly approach a teller, slip them a note demanding money, and then just as calmly walk out with the cash. She was polite, she was efficient, and she was, according to every witness, a senior citizen. The media quickly dubbed her the Granny Bandit, but the truth, as the FBI would soon discover, was even more fascinating. This wasn't just one woman, it was a rotating team of them, and they were all in it together. The masterminds behind this operation were a group of 5 women, all in their mid-50s to mid-70s. At the center were 2 cousins, Anita and Andrea, who had recruited 3 of their friends. Their cover was as ingenious as it was mundane, a monthly book club. To their neighbors in the quiet, gated community of Rancho Palos Verdes, they were just a group of retired friends who loved to read and socialize. The book club was real, but its discussions served as the perfect front for their criminal planning sessions. Over tea and cookies, they would allegedly discuss their latest literary selection, but they would also pass notes, literal handwritten robbery notes, for each other to practice. They would discuss which banks to target, what disguises to wear, and how to best avoid detection. They even had a system for laundering the money through casino trips, making the cash harder to trace. Their method was consistently low-key and effective. One woman would enter the bank, present the note, collect the money, and leave without causing a scene. They used a series of older model cars that blended seamlessly into traffic, and their age and demeanor made them practically invisible to the heightened suspicion usually aimed at younger, more threatening individuals. Who would ever suspect a sweet-looking grandmother of being a prolific bank robber? This inherent bias was their greatest weapon. It took a dedicated FBI task force and a tip from the public to finally connect the dots. When investigators raided the home of one of the suspects, they found the evidence laid out like a bizarre book report. Not just stolen cash, but a stack of demand notes and a detailed list of future bank targets. All 5 women were arrested and charged with multiple counts of robbery. The success of the book Club Bandits wasn't rooted in force or complex engineering. It was built on a profound understanding of social perception. They weaponized their own invisibility, using society's tendency to overlook and underestimate older women as the ultimate camouflage for their crimes. Their story forces us to confront our own ingrained stereotypes about who is capable of what, proving that criminal ingenuity knows no age limit and that sometimes the most dangerous meeting is one where everyone is discussing the latest bestseller. If the tactic of using a lemonade stand was a masterclass in misdirection, then the next heist on our list deserves an award for its sheer, brazen audacity in manipulation. Just a few years ago, in 2012, a group of thieves in Tampa, Florida, demonstrated that the key to a successful robbery isn't always a clever disguise or a complex tool. Sometimes it's a hot, cheesy pizza. This operation was a perfect example of social engineering, the art of manipulating people into performing actions or divulging confidential information. And their unwitting accomplice, a local delivery driver just trying to do his job. The target was a Bank of America branch, a building with all the standard security features, alarms, locks, and likely a time delay mechanism on the main vault. The robbers knew that a direct assault during business hours was far too risky, and breaking in after dark would trigger immediate alarms. Their solution was brilliantly indirect. They needed a reason for someone inside the bank, someone with authority, to open the door after closing time. So, one of the thieves simply picked up a phone and placed an order for a large pizza, specifying delivery to the bank's address. They waited, calculating the perfect moment to strike. When the pizza delivery driver arrived, knocking on the bank's locked glass doors, it created a scenario that felt completely normal to the employees still working inside. It was after hours, but it's not uncommon for staff to order dinner while finishing up paperwork or closing out the day's transactions. An employee, seeing the driver holding a recognizable pizza bag, saw no reason for suspicion. It was just a forgotten dinner order. They willingly walked over and unlocked the door to accept the delivery. This single, simple act was the entire point of the intricate plan. The moment the door was unlocked and opened, the waiting robbers burst out of hiding, rushing past the stunned delivery driver and the even more shocked employee. They were inside the secure perimeter without having to break a single window or pick a single lock. The team, now inside, quickly overpowered the few remaining employees. They forced them to disable the security systems and open the vault, making off with a substantial amount of cash before melting back into the Florida night. The entire operation was over in minutes. The pizza delivery driver, completely unaware of the role he had just played, was left behind, perhaps still holding the pizza, certainly bewildered by the sudden violent turn of his routine delivery. The heist was a success because it exploited a fundamental element of human behavior, trust in routine. The employees inside the bank didn't see a threat, they saw a pepperoni pizza. The criminals understood that the most sophisticated security system in the world is useless if a person can be tricked into voluntarily switching it off. They didn't defeat technology, they outsmarted human nature using a $20 pizza as their ultimate key. While the pizza delivery heist preyed on trust and routine, our next story involves a far more visceral and immediate form of psychological manipulation, pure, unadulterated fear. This bizarre event took place in Erie, Pennsylvania in October of 2003. And it involved a man who understood that the most powerful weapon in a bank isn't always a gun. It's the idea of one, especially when that idea is strapped to your chest. This is the strange case of the underwear bomber, a heist that was less about technical skill and more about a terrifying, high-stakes performance. The man, 36-year-old Brian Douglas Wells, didn't look like a typical bank robber when he walked into the PNC Bank that afternoon. He was a pizza delivery driver himself, a large man with a gentle demeanor, and he was carrying what appeared to be a homemade cane. But as he approached the counter, he handed the teller a note. It wasn't just a demand for money, it was a detailed set of instructions and a chilling declaration. The note claimed that he had a live bomb collar locked around his neck and that he was being forced to rob the bank. It stated that if he did not return with $250,000 within a specific time limit, the device would detonate, killing him instantly. To prove his point, he opened his shirt, revealing a complex, ominous-looking device secured with a combination lock. It was adorned with 2 pipes, wires, a switch, and a digital kitchen timer counting down the minutes. The bank employees, confronted with this surreal and horrifying scenario, had no reason to doubt the threat. Why would a delivery driver invent such an elaborate and dangerous story? They complied, handing over a bag containing just over $8,000 in cash. Wells took the money along with the cane, which the note claimed was actually a gun, and left the bank. He got into his car and began to drive away, but the bizarre nature of the event had already triggered a rapid police response. Within minutes, his car was surrounded by patrol cars in a nearby parking lot. Officers ordered him out of the vehicle at gunpoint, and that's when the situation escalated from a robbery to a national crisis. As Wells stood in the parking lot with his hands up, he repeatedly pleaded with the officers, telling them about the bomb and the dwindling time on the timer. The police, initially skeptical, soon saw the device for themselves. It looked frighteningly real. This was no longer just a bank robbery. It was a potential bombing, and the entire area was evacuated. A bomb squad was called to the scene, but as they assessed the situation and tried to communicate with Wells, the unthinkable happened. The device around his neck erupted, not in a massive explosion, but in a series of smaller pops and smoke. Brian Wells was killed instantly, right there on the pavement. The initial assumption was that this was a tragically botched robbery by a desperate man. But the investigation that followed uncovered a truth far more twisted and bizarre. Brian Wells was not the mastermind, he was a pawn. The plot was orchestrated by a strange group of individuals, including a local woman and her boyfriend, who had lured Wells to a remote location under the pretense of a prank. There, they had forced the collar onto him, claiming it was a fake, and coerced him into committing the robbery with the promise that they would remove it afterward. They had built the device to look terrifyingly authentic, but they never intended for it to actually kill him. It was meant to be a convincing prop to ensure his compliance and the bank's. However, their shoddy craftsmanship and the volatile nature of the pyrotechnics they used turned their macabre game into a real tragedy. The heist was temporarily successful. Wells did get the money, but its legacy is one of profound strangeness and a chilling lesson in how a convincing story and a frightening prop can be more effective than any real weapon. After a plot involving a bomb collar and a coerced delivery driver, it might seem like we've reached the peak of desperation in bank heists, but human ingenuity, or perhaps sheer frustration, knows no bounds. And sometimes that frustration manifests not in complex psychological games, but in raw, unadulterated force. If you can't find a way around a bank's security, one might reason, why not just go through it? This line of thinking led to one of the most visually astonishing and chaotically destructive heists on our list: the day a man decided to rob a bank with a construction vehicle. The scene was San Diego, California, on a seemingly ordinary afternoon in 1995. The target was a branch of the Home Fed Bank. For most people, the bank's thick, reinforced walls and imposing structure represented security and permanence. But for one man, they were just an obstacle to be demolished. His name was David Olenkiewicz, a 37-year-old with a history of financial troubles and apparently a very specific skill set. Frustrated and desperate, he conceived a plan that was less a stealthy heist and more a one-man siege. His instrument of choice was not a gun or a note, but a 40,000-pound Caterpillar D8 bulldozer. He first drove to a nearby construction site where he hotwired the massive machine. With the diesel engine roaring, he then embarked on a slow, methodical, and utterly surreal journey through the city streets. Imagine the confusion of San Diego commuters that day, seeing a fully operational bulldozer piloted by a single determined man, rumbling down the road not toward a construction zone but directly toward a bank. There was no subtlety, no disguise. This was a brute force approach on a monumental scale. Upon arriving at the bank, Ollenquix didn't hesitate. He lowered the bulldozer's enormous blade and drove it straight into the side of the building. The sound of screeching metal, shattering concrete, and crumbling drywall must have been deafening. He wasn't trying to pry open a door or crack a vault with precision. He was literally attempting to dismantle the entire bank, wall by wall, to get to the money inside. He smashed through the outer wall, plowed through teller stations, and sent desks and computers flying. His goal was the vault, and he used the bulldozer's immense power to tear through every interior barrier in his path. The scene was one of pure, unscripted chaos. Bank employees and customers fled in terror as the building was systematically deconstructed around them. Police arrived quickly, but they were faced with a scenario for which no training manual could possibly prepare them. How do you stop a man encased in the armored cabin of a construction vehicle that's currently inside a bank? They couldn't get close enough to physically remove him, and a firefight risked hitting innocent people and ricocheting wildly inside the devastated structure. For a tense period, all they could do was contain the area and watch the unbelievable destruction unfold. Amidst the rubble and the roaring engine, Ollenquix's plan saw a fleeting moment of success. He eventually managed to claw his way to the vault area. While he couldn't breach the vault itself with the bulldozer, the chaos allowed him to climb down from the vehicle and scoop up an estimated $30,000 in cash that had been scattered from obliterated teller drawers. With the money in hand, he then attempted a getaway, not in a car but on foot, scrambling over the wreckage he had just created. His escape was short-lived. The police, who had surrounded the building, quickly apprehended him as he emerged from the dust and debris. The sheer audacity of the bulldozer heist makes it unforgettable. It was a crime of passion and force, a spectacle that traded stealth for sheer destructive power. It succeeded momentarily because it was so utterly unprecedented that no security protocol could account for it. Banks are prepared for silent alarms and hostage situations, but not for a literal wrecking ball crashing through the lobby. This heist stands as a bizarre testament to the fact that when all else fails, some people will simply choose to bring a bulldozer to a bank fight. Following the sheer destructive spectacle of the bulldozer rampage, our next heist traded raw power for breathtaking whimsy and literal elevation. If driving a construction vehicle through a wall represents one extreme of criminal problem solving, then floating away in a hot air balloon represents the absolute opposite. In the annals of getaway plans, few are as brilliantly audacious or as visually stunning as the one executed in the small town of Grand Junction, Colorado, in the summer of 1980. This was a plan that didn't just aim to escape the police, it aimed to escape the very ground they were standing on. The mastermind was a man named Bruce McKay, who, along with two accomplices, set their sights on the First National Bank. Their scheme was born from a simple, almost childlike question. How do you create a getaway that leaves no tire tracks, avoids all roadblocks, and simply cannot be followed? Their answer was to look to the sky. They procured a hot air balloon and its burner system, planning to use it not for a leisurely sightseeing tour, but as the ultimate escape pod. The plan was as elegant as it was bizarre. After the robbery, they would launch from a field near the bank and drift silently on the wind currents, untouchable and untraceable, descending miles away in a pre-arranged location where a car would be waiting. On the day of the heist, the team put their plan into motion. While one member waited with the inflated balloon, Bruce McKay and another man entered the bank. They brandished weapons, ordered everyone to the floor, and quickly cleared out the cash drawers, stuffing an estimated $25,000 into bags. With the money secured, they sprinted out of the bank and made the short dash to the waiting balloon. As law enforcement radios began to crackle with the first reports of the robbery, the trio did something no responding officer could have ever anticipated. They fired up the balloon's burner, filling the envelope with hot air, and within moments they were lifting off. They rose gracefully into the vast Colorado sky, leaving a scene of terrestrial chaos behind them as they ascended into a world of silent, peaceful clouds. For the police arriving on the scene, the situation was utterly baffling. Witnesses were frantically pointing toward the heavens, describing a bank robbery that had literally just floated away. There were no fleeing cars to chase, no sirens to blare in pursuit. The perpetrators were vanishing into the blue, becoming a small, colorful dot on the horizon. The balloon escape was, in that initial moment, a complete and total success. They had achieved the perfect, impossible getaway. But as so often happens with even the most brilliant plans, reality, in this case meteorological reality, had other ideas. The thieves had mastered the mechanics of the robbery and the balloon launch, but they had failed to master the wind. The very element that granted them their freedom quickly turned into their captor. The anticipated gentle breezes that were supposed to carry them to their waiting confederate were instead erratic and powerful. They lost control of their trajectory, caught in air currents that tossed the balloon unpredictably. Instead of a smooth, controlled descent into a friendly field, they were dragged across the rugged Colorado terrain, the basket scraping against treetops and rocky outcrops. Their glorious escape devolved into a frantic struggle for survival as they fought to keep the balloon from crashing. The dramatic, silent flight ended not with a discreet landing, but with a violent crash in a remote, wooded area. Injured, disoriented, and miles from their intended destination, their flawless plan was in ruins. They were forced to abandon their balloon and attempt to flee on foot, but the authorities, now alerted to their general location, had set up a wide perimeter. All three men were captured within hours, their dream of a majestic escape dashed by the uncontrollable forces of nature. While ultimately unsuccessful in the long run, the heist remains a legendary entry in the history of strange crimes. Its brilliance lies in its conceptual genius, the understanding that the most effective way to avoid capture is to remove yourself entirely from the playing field. For a few fleeting minutes, they were untouchable, having executed a plan so wildly imaginative that it left the entire town of Grand Junction simply staring up in disbelief. It was a failure, but a glorious one, a testament to the endless human capacity for dreaming up incredible escapes, even if those dreams sometimes crash land in the woods. Leaving behind the chaotic flight of the hot air balloon, we descend into a far more subtle and psychologically unsettling realm of crime. If previous heists relied on force, machinery, or clever distraction, the next one on our list weaponized something entirely intangible: the human mind itself. This story takes us back to the 1970s, a time of great public fascination with the paranormal and the powers of suggestion, and introduces a criminal who allegedly didn't need a weapon to get what he wanted. He just needed the right words. This is the bizarre and hotly debated case of the hypnotist robber. The string of robberies began in the Pacific Northwest. The pattern was always the same. A well-dressed, impeccably polite man would approach a bank teller. He was calm, confident, and spoke in a soft, measured tone. He wouldn't brandish a gun or pass a threatening note. Instead, he would engage the teller in a brief, strange conversation. Witnesses would later report that he used peculiar phrases, often asking them to focus on a specific point, perhaps on his finger or a pen he was holding. He would speak in a rhythmic, almost mesmerizing monotone. Then he would simply tell them to hand over the money from their drawer, and they would. they would calmly, willingly, and methodically empty their cash drawers into the bag he provided. Afterward, he would thank them politely, turn around, and walk out of the bank at a leisurely pace. By the time the tellers seemingly snapped out of their daze, the man was long gone. They were often left confused, unable to fully recall the specific details of the interaction, and with a lingering feeling that something was deeply wrong. The man was eventually identified as a charismatic figure named Michael Grant. When he was finally captured, his explanation for his success was even more astonishing than the robberies themselves. He claimed he wasn't a robber in the traditional sense, he was a hypnotist. He told investigators that he had put the bank tellers into a trance, bypassing their conscious resistance and accessing their subconscious compliance. His story was both terrifying and captivating. It suggested a terrifying vulnerability that any one of us could be made to act against our own will and our own best interests through the power of a persuasive voice and a few carefully chosen words. The teller's own testimonies seemed to support this incredible claim. They didn't report feeling threatened, they reported feeling detached, foggy, and unusually compliant. They described a sense of being outside themselves, watching their own hands move to hand over the money as if they were observing someone else. This wasn't the classic response to an armed threat, which is typically sharp fear and adrenaline. This was something far more unusual, a state of profound and willing suggestibility. The case ignited a fierce debate among psychologists, law enforcement, and the general public. Was it truly possible to hypnotize someone so quickly under such stressful conditions and command them to perform an act that was so clearly against their moral and legal code? Most experts in the field of clinical and forensic hypnosis remain deeply skeptical. They argue that Hollywood has greatly exaggerated the power of hypnosis. In reality, hypnosis is not mind control. It's a state of highly focused attention and heightened suggestibility that requires a willing and cooperative participant. A person cannot be hypnotized against their will, and they would not perform an act under hypnosis that they would find morally reprehensible in their waking state. The scientific consensus suggests that what Michael Grant was likely exploiting was not a hypnotic trance, but a potent combination of other psychological principles. He was a master of social engineering and what is known as authority compliance. His well-groomed appearance and calm, commanding voice immediately established an aura of authority. In a high-stress situation, people often default to obeying figures who project confidence and command. He may have also induced a state of mild cognitive overload or confusion through his bizarre requests and patterned speech, momentarily short-circuiting the teller's normal decision-making processes and making them more susceptible to a direct, clear command like, "Give me the money." Whether through actual hypnosis or a brilliant application of psychological manipulation, the result was the same. Michael Grant successfully robbed multiple banks without ever raising his voice or showing a weapon. His story forces us to confront the unsettling power of influence and the fragile nature of our own autonomy. It stands as one of the strangest heists in history because the only thing that was stolen, aside from the money, was the very will of the people he encountered. He proved that the most vulnerable part of any security system isn't the vault or the alarm. It's the human mind and its willingness to trust a confident voice telling it what to do. While the hypnotist robber explored the vulnerabilities of the human mind, another crew was busy exploiting a far more tangible and far smellier weakness in a bank's defenses, the infrastructure beneath our feet. In the world of bank heists, the idea of tunneling is a classic, but the execution of this particular plan in 1986 took the concept to a new level of gritty determination. This wasn't a tunnel dug from a rented shop next door. This was a journey through the bowels of Los Angeles itself, a testament to the sheer willpower of thieves willing to go to any length and any depth for a payday. The target was the vault of the Security Pacific Bank in the heart of Los Angeles. The masterminds, a crew led by a man named Charles Johnson, knew that the bank's above-ground security was formidable. Armed guards, cameras, and reinforced doors made a direct assault virtually impossible. Their ingenious, if repulsive, solution was to approach the problem from an angle no one would expect from below. They began their operation not at the bank, but in a rented garage several blocks away. Their plan was to tunnel horizontally from the garage basement until they intercepted a major city sewer line. From there, they would navigate the labyrinthine sewer system, find the pipe that ran directly beneath the bank's vault, and then tunnel upward through the final layers of concrete and soil. What followed was weeks of grueling, claustrophobic, and frankly horrifying labor. The men would descend into the garage each day, disappearing into a narrow, hand-dug shaft. They used picks, shovels, and a small pneumatic drill to painstakingly carve their path through the earth, shoring up the tunnel with wooden planks to prevent collapses. The air was thick with dust and the constant, looming fear of being buried alive. After what must have felt like an eternity, they broke through into the main sewer tunnel. The stench was overwhelming, a foul mixture of human waste and chemical runoff, but it was a sign of progress. They now had a hidden highway leading directly to their target. Guiding themselves by city blueprints they had somehow obtained, they waded through the raw sewage, following the flow until they pinpointed the exact location beneath the bank's vault. The final phase was the most delicate, digging upward without causing a collapse or making too much noise that would alert people in the bank above. They worked in shifts, one man digging while another kept watch and hauled away the dirt in buckets, which they then secretly dumped back into the sewer system to be carried away. It was a slow, miserable, and incredibly risky process. Finally, after weeks of this subterranean ordeal, they broke through the final barrier, the reinforced concrete floor of the vault. They were in, under the cover of a holiday weekend when the bank would be closed for 3 days. The crew looted the vault. They focused on the safe deposit boxes, prying them open with crowbars and stuffing bags with an estimated $3.5 million in cash, jewelry, and bonds. Their escape was the same way they came in, back down through the hole into the foul-smelling sewer and through their tunnel to the garage. They covered their tracks, sealing the hole in the vault floor behind them as best they could, and vanished. The heist was a complete success, and it remained undiscovered until the bank reopened after the holiday. Employees arrived to find the vault floor slightly disturbed and dozens of safe deposit boxes ripped open and emptied. The initial confusion was absolute. There were no signs of forced entry on any door or window. It was as if the money had simply vanished into thin air. The investigation eventually uncovered the truth, but only after police, baffled by the lack of evidence, considered every possibility. They found the rented garage and the entrance to the tunnel, a monument to human endurance and criminal ambition. While most of the gang was eventually caught and much of the loot recovered, the heist itself stands as a legendary feat of engineering and sheer grit. It succeeded because it targeted the one place nobody thought to guard, the sewer, a place most people would go to great lengths to avoid. These thieves did the opposite, embracing the filth and the darkness to pull off a crime that was as brilliant as it was disgusting. After exploring the grimy depths of the LA sewer system, we emerge into the bright lights and constant buzz of a different kind of jungle, New York City. Here, in a place where seeing a film crew on the street is as common as seeing a yellow cab, a group of thieves staged a performance so convincing that it turned the entire city into their unwitting accomplice. This is the story of the fake film crew caper, a heist that weaponized the ordinary against itself. In the spring of 2010, a sophisticated crew descended upon the Upper West Side. Their target was a branch of the HSBC Bank. They didn't arrive with drills or disguises. They arrived with cameras, lighting rigs, walkie-talkies, and directors' chairs. To every New Yorker walking by, they were just another independent film production shooting on location, a daily occurrence that attracts little more than a curious glance. They had permits or at least convincing forgeries, and they spoke the unique language of filmmaking, barking orders about getting the shot and managing background extras. For 2 full days, they operated in plain sight, their presence masking their true intention, casing the bank with meticulous precision. Their equipment was their greatest tool. The high-resolution cameras on tripods weren't just for show. They were used to film the bank's entrance, its lobby, and the teller stations, capturing security guard rotations, the number of employees, and the layout in crystal-clear detail. The bulky sound booms allowed them to linger near open doors and windows, potentially eavesdropping on routines or conversations. The walkie-talkies provided secure, real-time communication that blended seamlessly with the city's soundscape. They were conducting the most brazen surveillance operation imaginable, and because it was dressed up as art, nobody questioned it for a second. On the 3rd day, they commenced principal photography. This was the day of the heist. The crew arrived as usual, setting up their equipment outside the bank. The scene was so familiar that it rendered them invisible. Then, on a silent signal, the performance reached its climax. Several of the production assistants and actors walked into the bank, but they weren't there to scout, they were there to work. Brandishing firearms they had concealed within their equipment cases, they swiftly moved to control the employees and customers. The robbery itself was fast and efficient, netting the crew an estimated $200,000. But the true genius of the plan was the exit strategy. Instead of fleeing in a panic, they walked out calmly, blending back into their own production. They loaded their props, which now included bags of stolen cash, back into their rented trucks and vans alongside the genuine film equipment. To any witness or even a passing police cruiser, it simply looked like the film crew was wrapping for the day, packing up their gear after a successful shoot. They didn't speed away, they drove off at a normal pace, disappearing into Manhattan's gridlock as just another vehicle in the afternoon traffic. The ruse was so perfect that by the time the police were even alerted to the robbery, the perpetrators were long gone, their identities hidden behind the mundane facade of 1,000 other film crews. They understood that in a city that thrives on spectacle, the best way to hide a crime is to stage it as just another show. After a heist executed by a fake film crew demonstrates the power of a perfect disguise, our next story strips away all human involvement from the crime itself, leaving behind only the most loyal and unsuspecting of accomplices. This bizarre event, which unfolded in a small town in Germany but captured imaginations worldwide, proves that sometimes the most effective criminal isn't a person at all. It's a very, very good boy who just wants to follow his master's commands. In the town of Zeven in 2005, a man devised a plan so simple and so utterly strange that it had almost no chance of working, which is precisely why it did. He didn't need a mask, a weapon, or a complex backstory. All he needed was his dog, a shepherd mix, and a basic understanding of animal training. His scheme was breathtaking in its minimalism. He would send the dog to do the dirty work for him. He prepared a note with a simple, direct demand for money. Then he attached this note to the dog's collar. He led his canine partner to the vicinity of a local bank, pointed him toward the entrance, and gave the command to go inside. Imagine the scene from the perspective of the bank employees and customers. The front door opens, but no human enters. Instead, a dog trots in, looking around expectantly. At first, people likely smiled, assuming a pet had simply gotten loose and wandered in. The animal was friendly and well-groomed, not appearing threatening in the slightest. Then, someone noticed the note tied to its collar. Curiosity undoubtedly took over. What could this be? A lost dog notice, a message from its owner. A bank teller reached down, untied the note, and read it. The message was unequivocal. This was a robbery. The note instructed the employees to place money into the bag that was also attached to the dog's collar, and then send the animal back out. There was an implied threat, of course, suggesting the perpetrator was armed and watching, ensuring compliance. Faced with this surreal and unprecedented situation, the bank staff made a decision that, in hindsight, seems both understandable and astonishing. They complied. They were likely too shocked, confused, and perhaps even amused to immediately process the gravity of the situation as a traditional armed threat. They carefully placed a quantity of cash into the bag on the dog's collar. Then, following the bizarre instructions, they ushered the animal back outside. The dog, having completed its mission perfectly, trotted faithfully back to its owner, who was waiting nearby. The man collected his cash, his dog, and his freedom and simply walked away. The heist was a complete, if temporary, success. The plan's brilliance lay entirely in its psychological manipulation and the element of total surprise. Bank security protocols are designed to detect and respond to human threats. They involve watching for nervous behavior, identifying weapons, and tracking suspicious individuals. An animal is a complete blind spot in that system. There is no protocol for a robbery conducted by a quadruped. The dog was the ultimate clean getaway vehicle. It couldn't identify its owner, it left no fingerprints, and it was completely unaware of its role in a felony. The man had removed himself from the most dangerous part of the operation entirely, avoiding any direct confrontation or risk of being identified inside the bank. He exploited humanity's innate trust and affection for animals, using it as a shield to carry out a crime. It was a heist that succeeded not through force but through sheer, bewildering novelty. After a dog delivered a robbery note and a crew disguised themselves as filmmakers, our next heist proves that the best way to hide a crime isn't just to look the part, it's to sound the part too. This story takes the concept of a distraction to its most joyfully chaotic extreme. Why simply avoid suspicion when you can bury your criminal activity under an avalanche of celebration, laughter, and the relentless percussive beat of pop music? This is the brilliantly absurd tale of the birthday party ambush. The target was a bank in the Diamond District of Antwerp, Belgium, a place renowned for its immense wealth and tight security. The would-be thieves knew that the standard approach was futile. This vault was a fortress. Their solution was a masterpiece of misdirection. Instead of trying to be quiet, they decided to be the noisiest neighbors imaginable. They rented a vacant office unit that shared a wall with the bank's vault. To any observer, the new tenants were a fun-loving, perhaps slightly obnoxious group of young professionals. They moved in sound equipment, speakers, party decorations, and cases of alcohol. Then they sent out invitations for a week-long birthday extravaganza. For days, the building echoed with the sounds of celebration. Loud music pulsed through the walls at all hours. There was the constant din of shouting, laughter, and the clinking of glasses. To the bank employees next door, it was an irritating nuisance, but nothing more. It was just a rowdy party, the kind you complain about but never actually call the police on. The noise was so constant and so expected that it became part of the background, rendering the bank's own audio-based security sensors utterly useless. Behind the locked door of the party room, however, a very different kind of work was underway. The celebration was a meticulously engineered sound blanket. While a few members of the crew kept up the ruse of revelry, dancing, shouting along to music, and occasionally stepping outside to smoke, others were engaged in back-breaking labor. Using the thunderous bass of the music to mask the sound, they used diamond-tipped drills and industrial jackhammers to burrow through the shared wall, inch by painstaking inch. The party's soundtrack wasn't just a random playlist. It was curated to include heavy, rhythmic songs that perfectly concealed the vibration and noise of the drilling. Each time the music reached a crescendo, the drilling would intensify. They worked in shifts, with one team drilling while the other danced, ensuring the party never stopped and the noise never abated. The bank's security guards, hearing nothing but the persistent thump of music, dismissed it as a temporary inconvenience. They had no reason to suspect that the shared wall was being systematically dismantled behind a poster of a pop star. After days of this dual operation, the crew finally broke through into the bank's vault. Under the continued cover of their deafening party, they looted millions of dollars worth of diamonds, cash, and valuables from the safe deposit boxes. Their exit was as clever as their entrance. They didn't flee in a panic. Instead, they simply stopped the music, cleaned up their rented space, and walked out the front door as if the party was finally over. They left behind nothing but empty bottles, some discarded streamers, and a large, perfectly drilled hole in the wall. The heist wasn't discovered until the bank opened for business after the weekend, by which time the thieves and the birthday boy were long gone, their festive caper a complete and stunning success. This scheme worked because it weaponized annoyance, understanding that people are far more likely to tolerate a loud party than they are to investigate one. The thieves didn't just hide their crime in the shadows, they hid it in plain sound. While the birthday party heist used sheer volume to mask a physical break-in, our next story represents a quantum leap in criminal methodology, moving from brute force to digital deception. This scheme didn't involve tunneling through walls or creating loud distractions. It involved hacking the very machine designed to give you money, turning it from a fortress of finance into a willing accomplice. This is the mind-bending case of the reverse ATM withdrawal, a 21st century heist that played out not with guns but with lines of malicious code. The target was a bank in the heart of a bustling European city in 2018. For the criminals, the goal wasn't to steal card numbers and PINs to clone cards later. That's old news. Their ambition was far more direct and audacious. They wanted to command the ATM to spit out its entire cash reserve on their command, and they wanted to do it from the comfort of their own homes. Their plan was a chilling fusion of old-school skimming and cutting-edge cyber intrusion. First, they needed physical access. Posing as ATM repair technicians complete with convincing uniforms and fake ID, they arrived at the machine. With an air of bored professionalism, they opened the front panel and got to work, but they weren't there to fix anything. In a matter of minutes, they installed two sinister pieces of hardware. The first was a classic skimmer designed to harvest the data from every card that was inserted. The second, however, was the real masterpiece, a sophisticated black box device. This gadget was wired directly into the ATM's internal computer, essentially creating a backdoor into the machine's brain. Once their hardware was in place, the digital heist could begin. The skimmer did its job, collecting a treasure trove of debit card numbers and their corresponding PINs. But this data wasn't used to create fake plastic cards. Instead, the criminals used it to gain administrative-level access to the bank's network remotely. From a laptop anywhere in the world, they could now send commands to the compromised ATM as if they were the bank itself authorizing a transaction. The final, brilliant step was to weaponize this access. They would remotely trigger what's known as a reversal transaction. In normal banking terms, a reversal is used to correct a mistake. For instance, if an ATM glitches and doesn't dispense cash after deducting money from an account, the bank reverses the transaction to credit the customer. These thieves perverted this safety feature. They would remotely simulate a scenario where the ATM had failed to dispense cash after a customer's withdrawal. Then they would command the machine to reverse this fake error. But instead of crediting an account, they manipulated the system to physically dispense the cash. The machine, fooled into thinking it was correcting its own error, would obediently spit out thousands of dollars, often in the middle of the night when no one was around. An accomplice would simply walk up, collect the money, and walk away. The entire process was invisible, with the bank's own logs showing what appeared to be a technical correction, not a robbery. This heist was a terrifying evolution in cybercrime. It succeeded because it didn't attack the ATM's locks or alarms, it attacked its logic. The criminals didn't need to crack the vault, they just needed to convince the vault that it had made a mistake and needed to rectify it. They turned the bank's own security protocols and error correction systems against itself, creating a perfect digital crime with almost no traditional evidence. It was a quiet, clean, and devastatingly effective robbery that proved in the modern age the most valuable tool a thief can possess isn't a crowbar, it's a flaw in the code. If the birthday party heist proved that noise could be the perfect cover, then the next robbery on our list demonstrates that its polar opposite, the serene, meditative quiet of a yoga class, could be just as effective. This bizarre scheme unfolded in a quiet suburban strip mall in 2014, where a group of thieves masterfully co-opted the culture of wellness and mindfulness to execute a crime of pure distraction. Their weapon wasn't a jackhammer or a gun, it was downward-facing dog and the soothing tones of a guided meditation. The target was a bank that shared a wall with a vacant retail unit. The criminal's plan was classic in its objective tunnel through that shared wall, but utterly novel in its execution. Instead of masking the sound of their work with noise, they sought to eliminate the need for silence altogether by controlling the environment. They rented the empty unit next door, and rather than keeping a low profile, they announced the grand opening of a new pop-up yoga studio. They distributed flyers in the neighborhood and posted on local community boards offering free introductory classes to build a clientele. It was a brilliant ruse that immediately built goodwill and curiosity, not suspicion. On the day of the heist, the yoga studio was bustling with activity. A dozen or so genuine participants, ranging from busy moms to stressed-out office workers, showed up for the promised free session. A member of the criminal team, who had boned up on enough yoga terminology to sound convincing, played the part of the instructor. As the class began, the room fell into a hushed, focused silence, punctuated only by the instructor's calm voice and the soft rustle of movement. The students were completely engrossed in their practice, their eyes closed or focused inward, seeking a moment of peace. They had no idea that their search for Zen was providing the perfect acoustic and visual cover for a felony happening just feet away. While the class moved through its sun salutations, other members of the crew were in a back room, finally putting their real plan into motion. The shared wall with the bank wasn't just a wall, it also contained a large, sealed ventilation duct. With the yoga class providing a living, breathing curtain of innocence, they set to work quietly dismantling the vent cover on their side. The gentle music playing in the studio and the instructor's steady monologue ensured that any faint scraping or drilling was completely inaudible. Once the duct was open, a slender member of the team shimmered into the tight space, crawling through the dusty passageway that led directly into the bank's ceiling plenum. He dropped down into a staff-only area after hours, avoiding the main lobby entirely. From there, he was able to disable internal alarms and let his partners in through a back door. The team then had free rein to loot the vault and teller drawers, all while a group of unsuspecting citizens unknowingly served as their lookouts, their peaceful gathering making the entire operation seem perfectly normal from the outside. The heist was a stunning success, discovered only after the yoga class had ended. The students had left feeling relaxed and rejuvenated, and the instructors had packed up their mats and vanished. It worked because it exploited a fundamental truth about human behavior. We are conditioned to trust certain environments implicitly. A bank is a place of high alert, but a yoga class is a sanctuary of trust and tranquility. The criminals understood that the best way to avoid detection isn't always to be invisible. Sometimes it's to be so visibly, benignly ordinary that you become part of the scenery. They didn't just steal money, they stole the very aura of peace and sold it back to their victims as the ultimate distraction. Leaving behind the deceptive calm of the yoga studio heist, we travel to a place where the past isn't just remembered, it's passionately reenacted. Our next story proves that the perfect camouflage isn't always about blending into the present. Sometimes it's about disappearing into history itself. In the quaint, tourist-friendly town of Northfield, Minnesota, a place famous for a violent bank raid by the James Younger Gang in 1876. A group of modern-day thieves staged a heist by hiding their crime in a public performance of the very event they were mimicking. The town was hosting its annual Defeat of Jesse James Days, a festival that draws crowds eager to watch historical reenactors in period costume bring the Old West to life. The streets were filled with men in cowboy hats and duster coats, women in bonnets and long dresses, and the constant pop of blank gunfire from staged shootouts. For the criminals, this organized chaos was the ultimate smokescreen. They didn't need to create a distraction. The town was already providing one. Their plan was to become performers in a drama nobody knew was real. Dressed in impeccable period-appropriate attire complete with replica revolvers and weathered leather boots, the thieves mingled with the other reenactors. To the thousands of spectators, they were just particularly committed actors, their faces obscured by thick beards and wide-brimmed hats. As a scheduled reenactment of the original 1876 robbery began near the town square, this rogue faction broke off from the main group. While the crowd's attention was fixed on the staged drama of the historical event, the real robbery was just beginning a block away. They entered the modern bank not with a shout, but with the same exaggerated bravado of the actors outside. Initially, tellers and customers were more confused than frightened. They assumed it was part of the festival, perhaps an unscheduled bit of street theater that had wandered indoors. The men even shouted lines like, "This is a hold-up," in the same theatrical tone used by the reenactors outside. This initial moment of uncertainty was all they needed. By the time anyone realized the guns were real and the threat was genuine, the thieves had already secured the money from the teller drawers. They backed out of the bank, tipping their hats to bewildered onlookers, and melted back into the festival crowd. Their escape was a masterpiece of timing and misdirection. Instead of fleeing in a panic, they simply rejoined the flow of the reenactment. They became just more faces in a sea of cowboys and outlaws, their bag of stolen cash just another period-accurate prop to any casual observer. The swirling dust, the cheering crowds, and the general cacophony of the festival provided the perfect cover. By the time the police were alerted and arrived on the scene, they were confronted with a nearly impossible task, finding a few specific cowboys in a town full of them. The thieves had effectively vanished into history, using the town's own celebration of its infamous past as the ultimate getaway vehicle. This heist succeeded because it exploited our collective suspension of disbelief, understanding that in the right context, even a real crime can be dismissed as just part of the show. After a heist that hid a robbery within a historical celebration, we encounter a scheme that required no costume, no tunnel, and no physical presence at all. This next story is a chilling lesson in how to rob a bank without even being in the same state, proving that the most powerful weapon in a criminal's arsenal can be nothing more than a piece of paper and a well-crafted lie. It's the unsettling case of the poison pen letters, a heist that weaponized public health panic against the very people trusted to protect our money. The mastermind behind this scheme remains unknown, a ghost who orchestrated fear from a distance. His target wasn't a vault or a teller's drawer, it was the peace of mind of an entire community. The plan began with a series of anonymous letters mailed to the homes of several high-ranking bank managers across a Midwestern state. The letters were not typical ransom notes, they were meticulously typed, cold, and clinical in their delivery of a horrifying threat. The author claimed to have poisoned a selection of over-the-counter medications, pain relievers, cold medicine, antacids on the shelves of major grocery and pharmacy chains in the manager's own neighborhoods. The threat was visceral and immediate, playing on every parent's deepest fear that a simple act of buying medicine to help a sick child could instead cause unimaginable harm. But the letters didn't just broadcast a threat, they attached a very specific and very personal demand. The author instructed each bank manager to withdraw a large sum of money from their own institution, often $50,000 or more. and to place it in a designated, secluded outdoor location, like a hollow tree stump or behind a specific dumpster in a remote park. The instructions were precise, detailing the type of bag to use and the exact time the drop was to be made. The unspoken threat was clear: comply, or the random, untraceable poisoning of public goods would continue, and the blood would be on the bank manager's hands. The psychological pressure applied was immense and brutally effective. The bank managers were not being robbed as employees, they were being terrorized as human beings and community members. They were forced into an impossible choice: violate bank policy and federal law, or be responsible for a potential public health catastrophe. Faced with this horrific dilemma, multiple managers capitulated. They followed the instructions to the letter, withdrawing the funds and leaving the money in the specified dead drops. The anonymous criminal, watching from a safe distance or perhaps relying on a timer, would then retrieve the cash and vanish. The entire transaction was completed without a single face-to-face interaction, without a weapon being drawn, and without the criminal ever setting foot on bank property. The scheme's brilliance lay in its ruthless exploitation of empathy and civic duty. The robber wasn't threatening the managers themselves, he was threatening innocent strangers, knowing that the managers would feel a moral obligation to prevent it. He turned their own humanity into a vulnerability. Furthermore, the method was virtually untraceable. The letters were mailed from different cities, likely with gloves to avoid fingerprints. The dead drops were in anonymous public spaces with no surveillance. The money was clean, withdrawn legally by the managers themselves, leaving no digital footprint leading back to the perpetrator. He had engineered a perfect remote control robbery, using fear as his messenger and conscience as his accomplice. While the FBI eventually linked the cases and the threats eventually stopped, the perpetrator was never caught, leaving behind a legacy of a heist that succeeded by attacking not a building, but the very fabric of human decency. But if the poison pen heist demonstrated the power of remote fear, our next story reveals how a different kind of pressure, sheer, unadulterated embarrassment, can be just as effective a tool for a thief. This scheme, unfolding in a quiet town, required no anonymous letters, just a clever bit of street theater and a prop so mundane it was practically invisible. The target wasn't a bank manager's conscience, but a teller's sense of public decorum, and the weapon of choice was a simple, handwritten sign. The robber's approach was breathtaking in its audacious simplicity. He would walk into a bank carrying a small, neatly lettered sign hanging from a string around his neck. The message on the sign was not a demand, but a confession written in clear, apologetic letters. It read something to the effect of, "I have a very contagious and embarrassing medical condition. Please be understanding and hurry." He wouldn't say a word. He would simply walk up to a teller, point to the sign, and then slide a note across the counter with his actual instructions to hand over the money. The psychological effect on the bank employees was instantaneous and powerful. The threat of an armed robber is clear and triggers a standard fear response. But this was something entirely different. It was a social threat. The sign introduced a potent cocktail of revulsion, pity, and a powerful desire to end the uncomfortable encounter as quickly as possible. Tellers, trained to be helpful and avoid causing a scene, were suddenly faced with a dilemma. Do they risk a protracted, embarrassing confrontation with a seemingly ill person? Do they call for a manager and draw more attention to the situation? Or do they simply comply with the note's demand to make the awkward moment go away? Time and again, they chose the path of least resistance. They would quickly empty their drawers into the man's bag, eager for him to leave. The robber would then give a grateful nod, adjust his sign, and walk calmly out the door, his fictional ailment having provided the perfect cover for a very real crime. This heist worked because it bypassed security protocols designed for violence and replaced them with a scenario no one had trained for. It exploited a deeply human desire to avoid social discomfort and public shame. The robber wasn't just stealing money, he was stealing composure, using a shared social anxiety as his ultimate leverage. He understood that in certain situations, the fear of being embarrassed can be a more powerful motivator than the fear of being robbed. From the bizarre psychology of the contagious condition sign, we now turn to a heist that was far less about human interaction and far more about patience, tiny tools, and an almost artistic level of precision. This story moves us from the bank lobby to the one place every patron assumes is utterly secure, the safety deposit box room. While most thieves think big, explosives, torches, crowbars, the protagonist of this tale thought incredibly, impossibly small. His story is a masterclass in the art of the slow, silent steal. The criminal was a lone wolf, a meticulous craftsman rather than a brash thug. Over a period of many months, he rented a safety deposit box at a prestigious bank. He was a perfect, quiet customer, always polite, always on time for his appointments to access his box. But his box was not for storing valuables, it was his base of operations. His tool of choice was not a drill, but a custom-made implement akin to a very thin, flexible dentist's mirror on a long handle, combined with a delicate grabbing tool. His target was not his own box, but the ones on either side of him. The technique, known as keystoning, preyed on an old-fashioned design flaw in many safety deposit box units. The thin metal walls separating the boxes did not always extend seamlessly into the locking mechanism at the rear. There was often a minuscule gap, a space no wider than a few millimeters. During his scheduled visits to his own box, the thief would work with the patience of a watchmaker. He would insert his specialized tool into the keyhole of his own box and then carefully, painstakingly, maneuver it through this tiny gap into the vacant space of the adjacent box. Using the mirror, he could see inside, and with the grabber, he could slowly, delicately fish out items of value, stacks of cash, jewelry, loose diamonds. He would transfer these treasures into his own box, never taking too much from any one box to avoid raising suspicion. He might visit a dozen times, only ever taking a single necklace or a few bills from a stacked pile, making the loss virtually undetectable to owners who might only check their boxes once a year. His success was born from an understanding that true security is an illusion of scale. The bank's vault was impregnable to a sledgehammer, but it was utterly vulnerable to a piece of wire and a sliver of mirror. He didn't defeat the security, he slipped through its cracks, literally. He proved that the most devastating attacks aren't always loud and violent. Sometimes they are so quiet, so slow, and so small that they are over long before anyone even realizes they've begun. The thefts were only discovered months later during a routine audit, and even then, piecing together how it was done felt more like solving a magic trick than investigating a crime. It was a heist of subtlety and scale, where the grand prize was won not by force, but by 1,000 tiny, imperceptible movements. After the meticulous, almost surgical precision of the safety deposit box keystoning, our next story plunges us into a completely different element, trading subtlety for stunning physical audacity. This heist, which unfolded in the early 1990s, demonstrates that the perfect escape route isn't always on a map. Sometimes it's hidden beneath the surface of a placid lake, requiring not a fast car, but a set of scuba gear and nerves of steel. This is the tale of the synchronized swimming getaway, a plan so cool and calculated it feels more like a spy thriller than a bank job. The target was a modest bank branch in a small town that just so happened to be situated on the shore of a large, deep lake. The thieves, a crew of 3, had spent weeks not just casing the bank but studying the environment. They noted the police response times, the patrol patterns, and most importantly, the fact that the standard protocol for a fleeing vehicle involved setting up roadblocks on every major road out of town. They asked a simple, brilliant question: what if we don't use the roads at all? Their plan was to render the entire terrestrial manhunt utterly useless by simply vanishing into the water. On the day of the heist, everything went with clockwork precision. 2 members of the team entered the bank, their movements quick and efficient. They secured a substantial haul from the teller drawers, avoiding the more time-consuming vault. Meanwhile, the 3rd member of the crew, the getaway driver, had a very different role. Instead of idling a car outside, he was already in the water. Anchored just offshore, hidden from view by a small line of trees, was a small, innocuous fishing boat. On board, carefully stowed, were 3 full sets of scuba equipment: tanks, regulators, buoyancy compensators, and weights. The moment the robbers burst out of the bank, they didn't sprint for a car. They sprinted directly for the lake's edge, tearing off their outer layer of clothing to reveal wetsuits they had been wearing underneath. They dove into the cold water and swam a short, powerful distance to the waiting boat. In a flawlessly choreographed sequence, they hauled themselves aboard, stashed the money in a waterproof bag, and within 60 seconds of leaving the bank, they were fully geared up in their scuba equipment. With a final check of their air supplies, they rolled backwards off the sides of the boat, disappearing beneath the murky water with barely a splash. The scene they left behind was one of pure confusion for the arriving police. Witnesses pointed toward the lake, describing a boat, but by the time officers arrived on the shoreline, the vessel was empty, drifting gently. There were no suspects in sight. Police dogs were brought in, but their powerful noses were completely baffled. The trail ended abruptly at the water's edge. The thieves had executed the ultimate disappearing act. Underwater, they were invisible, silent, and free from any form of traditional pursuit. They followed a pre-laid guideline along the lake bottom, navigating by compass for nearly a mile, eventually surfacing in a completely different, secluded cove far from the chaos. A second clean vehicle was waiting there for them, and they drove away undetected, their clothes dry and their alibi secure. The plan's success was a testament to its utter originality. It wasn't just an escape, it was a total environmental shift. They didn't beat the police, they changed the game entirely, moving the chase to a realm where the authorities had no resources, no protocol, and no ability to follow. For a few glorious hours, they had gotten away with the perfect crime, their aquatic evasion leaving behind nothing but bubbles and bewilderment. It was a heist that proved the most effective getaway is the one that literally leaves no trail to follow. After a crew made their escape through the cold depths of a lake, our next heist proves that sometimes the most effective way into a fortress isn't to sneak in under cover of darkness, but to walk right through the front door in the bright light of day, carrying a toolbox and wearing a hard hat. This operation ditched the aquatic gear for a different kind of uniform, one that grants near invisibility in an urban environment, the outfit of a utility worker. This was not a smash and grab. It was a masterclass in patience and psychological infiltration, a slow burn heist that played out over days right under the noses of the very people they were robbing. The target was a major bank in a bustling city center, a building with all the modern security one would expect. The criminals knew that a direct assault was futile. Their genius lay in understanding that while banks are designed to keep out unauthorized individuals, they are obligated to let in certain people. Plumbers, electricians, HVAC technicians. These are the lifeblood of a functioning building, and their presence is so routine it becomes part of the background noise of daily business. The crew's plan was to become that background noise. They acquired authentic-looking utility worker uniforms, complete with logo-embroidered shirts, heavy-duty tool belts, and hard hats. They even obtained official-looking clipboards and work orders, forgeries so convincing they could withstand a casual glance from a security guard. Their performance began days before the actual robbery. A team of 2 or 3 workers would arrive at the bank each morning, right as employees were streaming in. They would sign in with the building's security, flashing their fake ID and pointing to a work order about investigating a persistent moisture issue or conducting mandated electrical conduit inspections in the basement. This was a critical part of the ruse. By starting the charade days in advance, they normalized their presence. The guards saw them every day. The bank employees passed them in the hallways. They became familiar, unremarkable faces. They would spend hours in the basement, a labyrinth of pipes, wires, and boiler systems that also housed the bank's security and alarm control panels. While down there, they did actual manual labor, tightening bolts, tracing wires, looking busy, all while conducting the most important part of their mission, casing the security infrastructure. With each passing day, their access grew more unquestioned. They learned the guards' rotation schedules, identified blind spots in the camera coverage, and mapped the exact location of every alarm sensor and phone line connected to the vault and main banking floor. When the time was right, they moved to Phase 2. On the day of the heist, they arrived as usual, signed in as usual, and descended to the basement as usual. But this time, their toolboxes didn't just contain wrenches and voltage testers. Hidden within were wire cutters, laptop computers for interfacing with security systems, and bypass devices. Under the pretense of rerouting circuits to prevent an overload, they began the meticulous process of disabling the bank's entire security apparatus. They severed phone lines to prevent automatic dialing to the police. They looped camera feeds so the monitors in the security office showed an empty, peaceful lobby even as their partners entered upstairs. They disarmed motion sensors on the vault door. With the bank's electronic nervous system now completely neutralized, the final phase could begin. The utility workers simply radioed their team upstairs, men now dressed as business professionals who walked into the utterly vulnerable bank. With no alarms to trigger and cameras showing a false reality, the team had all the time in the world to calmly empty the vault and teller drawers. Their escape was as bold as their entrance. They didn't run, they packed their tools, signed out with the security guard they'd been chatting with for days, and wished him a good weekend as they left the building, their bags now heavy with cash. The heist wasn't discovered until the next business day, long after the utility crew had vanished into thin air. It was a stunning success built entirely on the audacity of the mundane, proving that the most powerful key to a vault isn't a code or a crowbar, but the unquestioned authority of a uniform and a clipboard. Shifting from the methodical infiltration of utility workers, we arrive at a heist that traded technical subterfuge for a different kind of illusion, one built on greed, excitement, and the universal dream of a life-changing windfall. This scheme didn't involve disabling alarms or blending into the background. It involved creating a moment of such overwhelming distraction that the bank's entire security posture momentarily crumbled. This is the story of the lottery ticket scam, a multi-layered con that turned a symbol of fortune into the ultimate tool of deception. The plan was the brainchild of a crew that understood human psychology as well as any safecracker understands locks. Their insight was simple yet profound. The most impenetrable security system in the world is useless if the people operating it are too distracted to use it. They needed a trigger powerful enough to short-circuit professional protocol and mundane routine. Their answer was to manufacture a winning lottery ticket. Not just any winner, but a jaw-dropping multi-million-dollar jackpot winner. Using high-quality printers and specialized paper stock, they produced near-perfect replicas of a genuine high-value scratch-off ticket. Chinese letter tickets were masterpieces of fraud, complete with the correct logos, security patterns, and that all-important winning combination of numbers. The operation required precise timing and a cast of convincing actors. The first team member, playing the part of an ecstatic, almost delirious winner, would enter the bank. Their performance was key. They had to be loud, tearful, and utterly overwhelmed with joy, immediately drawing the attention of every customer and employee in the building. Waving the fake winning ticket in the air, they would demand to speak with the manager to verify their life-altering prize and secure their newfound fortune. This spectacle was designed to be irresistible. In an instant, the formal, controlled environment of the bank transformed into a scene of spontaneous celebration. Tellers would abandon their posts to get a look, managers would rush out of their offices, and even the security guards would find their focus pulled toward the commotion, their vigilance momentarily relaxed by the positive excitement. This collective lapse in attention was the criminal team's only window of opportunity. While the entire bank was captivated by the fictional winner, a second accomplice who had entered separately and remained inconspicuous would make their move. The distraction provided the perfect cover to bypass secure doors or gates that were usually monitored. In some versions of this scam, the accomplice simply slipped behind the counter to loot cash drawers left unattended by tellers who had stepped away to join the celebration. In more ambitious iterations, they used the chaos to access more secure areas, like a manager's office where vault keys might be kept, or even to get close enough to the vault itself to plant a device or simply walk in if the door had been left ajar in the hurried excitement. The beauty of the scheme was its layered criminality. Even if the theft itself was discovered quickly, the crew had already achieved a secondary objective. The winner would often manage to pressure a bank manager in the heat of the moment into providing a good faith advance or loan against the purported winnings, effectively conning the bank out of additional funds through straight fraud before anyone had time to verify the ticket's authenticity. By the time the bank officials thought to calmly scrutinize the ticket or call the lottery commission, the winner and their partner had vanished with both the stolen cash and any advanced funds, leaving behind nothing but a worthless piece of paper and a room full of bewildered, embarrassed employees. The heist succeeded because it attacked the bank's weakest point, the innate human desire to share in a moment of joy and good fortune, proving that sometimes the most effective weapon isn't a threat but a tantalizing promise. While the lottery ticket scam proved that manufactured joy could be the ultimate smokescreen, our next heist demonstrates that manufactured terror could be just as effective. This bizarre event unfolded in a small town that prided itself on its annual Halloween celebration, a community event so beloved it featured a famously elaborate and spine-chilling haunted house. For one crew of thieves, the screams of delight and terror weren't just background noise, they were the central instrument in their symphony of crime, the perfect cover for what would become known as the haunted house heist. The target was a modest bank branch that shared a parking lot with a large, vacant warehouse, the very building the town converted each October into its premier haunted attraction. The bank and the haunted house were neighbors in seasonal chaos, a fact the criminals saw not as an obstacle, but as the key to their entire plan. For weeks, as volunteers built maze-like corridors and installed animatronic monsters, the thieves were conducting surveillance of their own. They noted the bank's closing time, the shift changes for the security guard, and most importantly, the precise timing of the haunted house's most jarring special effects. The air cannon that fired with a deafening blast every 90 seconds, the thunderous strobe-lit earthquake simulation, and the blood-curdling soundtrack of shrieks and chainsaws that played on a continuous, predictable loop. The night of the heist was the haunted house's peak, the Saturday before Halloween. The parking lot was packed with families and teenagers, all buzzing with anticipatory fear. The air was thick with the smell of popcorn, fake fog, and the electrifying energy of a community letting its collective guard down for a good scare. As the line snaked toward the warehouse entrance, the thieves put their plan into motion. Dressed not in black tactical gear, but in cheap, store-bought zombie and skeleton costumes, they blended seamlessly with the crowd. They were just more faces in the macabre masquerade, their costumes granting them total anonymity. While the crowd's attention was fixated on the horrors inside the haunted house, the team's point man made his move. He used a crowbar to swiftly jimmy open a side service door to the bank, a move that would normally create a loud, suspicious cracking sound, but his timing was impeccable. He struck the exact moment the haunted house's massive air cannon fired. its concussive thump perfectly masking the sound of splintering wood. Inside, the team worked with frantic efficiency. They used industrial drills to attack the vault door, but again, their actions were choreographed to the haunted house's soundtrack. The high-pitched whine of the drill bit chewing through metal was launched in unison with a recorded burst of screeching violins and howling wolves from the attraction speakers. The periodic, thunderous boom of the simulated earthquake effect covered the heavier thuds of their tools. For nearly an hour, they worked undetected. The bank's lone overnight security guard sitting at his desk was completely oblivious. From his perspective, the occasional vibrations and muffled bangs were just part of the festive cacophony next door, an annoyance to be endured one night a year. He never once thought the screams outside were covering a real crime happening 30 feet from his post. The thieves successfully breached the vault, emptying cash drawers and safe deposit boxes into duffel bags. Their escape was as simple as their entry. They simply walked out the broken door, melted back into the queue of people waiting for the haunted house, and casually strolled to their car parked blocks away, their monstrous costumes ensuring they were remembered not as individuals but as part of the festive backdrop. The heist was a masterful exploitation of context. The thieves understood that true concealment isn't always about silence. Sometimes it's about matching your criminal noise to the environment's acceptable noise. They didn't hide their activities, they buried them under a mountain of sanctioned, celebratory sound and distraction, using a community's search for fear as the perfect cover for their very real felony. It was a scheme that succeeded because it was so perfectly timed to the rhythm of the town itself, a criminal act disguised as just another part of the show. While the haunted house heist used the chaotic sounds of a community festival as its cover, our next story represents a move toward stark, minimalist efficiency, trading human actors and elaborate soundscapes for pure, detached technology. In the world of bank robbery, the classic note-passing heist is one of the most common and often least successful methods, largely because it requires the robber to stand right there in front of the teller, exposed to cameras and potential witnesses. But in 2013, a brilliantly tech-savvy criminal in insert-specific city/state if available, otherwise a generic locale, re-engineered this old-school tactic for the modern age, removing the human element from the equation almost entirely. His tool of choice wasn't a gun or a disguise, it was a modified children's toy, transforming a simple bank job into a remote-controlled operation. The plan was as ingenious as it was surreal. The perpetrator, operating alone, positioned himself at a safe distance from the bank, perhaps in a parked car across the street, on a nearby rooftop, or simply blending into the crowd on the sidewalk. His link to the teller inside was a high-end, hobby-grade remote control car, the kind used for racing or stunts, capable of precise movement and carrying a small payload. Taped to the top of this little vehicle was a neatly written demand note. With a flick of a joystick, he sent the car zipping across the bank's lobby floor, navigating around chairs and under waiting area tables like a tiny, silent messenger of doom. It came to a stop directly at the teller's window, its presence so utterly bizarre and out of context that it instantly created a state of confusion and shock. For the bank employees and customers, the sight was deeply disorienting. A remote control car inside a bank isn't a normal threat, it's a puzzling anomaly. The initial reaction was likely one of curiosity or amusement rather than fear, but that confusion was the entire point of the strategy. It short-circuited the standard robbery response protocol. By the time a teller leaned over, read the note demanding money, and understood the gravity of the situation, the psychological advantage was already with the criminal. The note included specific instructions: place the cash on the car's platform and send it back. The unspoken threat was clear: the person controlling this car was watching, and while they weren't visible, they were undoubtedly armed. Faced with this unprecedented scenario, tellers complied, stacking bundles of bills onto the small vehicle. With the money secured, the driver simply reversed the car's direction, guiding it on a return trip across the polished floor and back out the bank's door, where he could retrieve the cash and vanish into the urban environment without ever having been inside. The scheme was a masterstroke in risk mitigation. It eliminated the two biggest points of failure in a traditional note job, being identified by facial recognition software and being apprehended on the spot by arriving police. The perpetrator's face was never captured on camera, his fingerprints were never left on the counter, and his physical description was impossible for witnesses to provide. He was a ghost, a disembodied presence whose only tangible form was a 6-inch-tall plastic car. This heist succeeded because it weaponized absurdity and technological distance, proving that in an increasingly remote-controlled world, even crime can be conducted by proxy. This brings us to a heist that traded complex technology and elaborate ruses for a far simpler, yet genetically brilliant form of deception. In the world of crime, the perfect alibi is often the holy grail, an unimpeachable reason for being somewhere else when the crime occurred. But what if you could be in two places at once? For a pair of identical twin brothers, this wasn't a philosophical question. It was the foundation of their entire criminal operation. Their method was so elegantly simple it was almost foolproof. They became each other's perfect, living, breathing alibis. The brothers, whose case fascinated authorities in the early 2010s, understood that their nearly indistinguishable appearance was a superpower. They planned their heists with a precision that rivaled any Stopwatch Gang, but their timing was focused on alibis, not just speed. The scheme, which became known as the sibling swap, worked like a perfectly choreographed dance. On the day of a planned robbery, one twin would ensure he was highly visible in a very public location far from the target bank. He would be having a long, chatty lunch with friends, getting a very public haircut, or attending a scheduled appointment, all while being captured on security cameras and witnessed by numerous people who could verify his identity and the time. This was the foundation of the alibi, a rock-solid anchor in time and space. Simultaneously, his brother, the doppelganger, would be executing the robbery miles away. He would walk into the bank, commit the theft, and make his escape. The brilliance of the plan was in the aftermath. When police inevitably began their investigation, they would quickly land on the twins as suspects. Their similarity and criminal records often made them persons of interest. But the moment they did, the alibi would snap into place. The twin who was the robber could calmly point to his brother's public alibi and claim, truthfully, that he was the one seen at the restaurant or the barber shop. The twin who provided the alibi would, of course, corroborate the story. From the perspective of the law, it created an impossible logical knot. The evidence from the bank's security footage showed one face, but the evidence from the alibi location showed the same face at the exact same time. How could one man be in two places at once? This ingenious swap prolonged their crime spree for an astonishing length of time. Law enforcement was consistently stymied. They knew the twins were responsible, but they could never definitively prove which brother was which for any given robbery. The cases would stall, trapped in a maze of reasonable doubt, allowing the brothers to strike again and again. Their success wasn't built on force or stealth, but on a fundamental exploitation of a flaw in the justice system's reliance on eyewitness and camera identification. They turned their greatest liability, being known to police, into their greatest asset. The scheme finally began to unravel, not through a failure of their plan, but through the relentless, painstaking work of forensic video analysts. These experts pored over the grainy security footage from each robbery, not for the obvious similarities, but for the most minute, almost invisible differences. They were looking for the telltale signs that distinguish even the most identical of twins. A slight variation in the way one brother held his head, a tiny scar the other didn't have, a subtle difference in their gaits or the way a jacket fit one sibling's shoulders. It was a needle in a haystack search, but eventually they found their needles. By compiling a mosaic of these tiny discrepancies across multiple robberies, analysts were able to slowly, painstakingly separate the two identities on camera. They could finally say with scientific certainty, this was Twin A at the bank and the alibi witness saw Twin B at the cafe. The wall of impenetrable doubt they had built around themselves crumbled, leading to their eventual arrest and conviction. The sibling swap heist remains a stunning example of how the simplest ideas, rooted in a unique human advantage, can often be the most difficult to defeat, forcing the systems designed to catch criminals to evolve in order to see past the surface. But just as authorities began to unravel the genetic puzzle of the twin brothers, another crew was already perfecting a crime that weaponized a different kind of twin, the modern twin forces of social connectivity and viral trends. This next heist didn't rely on biological doppelgangers. It relied on creating hundreds of them, a synchronized army of strangers who became unwitting players in a criminal masterpiece. In an age where a viral video can gather a crowd of thousands in minutes, one group saw an opportunity not for fame, but for fortune, orchestrating what would become known as the flash mob diversion. The stage was set on a bustling downtown street, the target a bank with large glass windows offering a clear view of the sidewalk. The criminals understood that in a major city, police resources are stretched thin, and their response is prioritized by apparent threat level. A silent alarm from a bank might get a rapid response, but a massive, chaotic public disturbance right outside would demand every available officer immediately. Their plan was to create that exact scenario, not with violence but with rhythm. Using encrypted social media channels and invite-only forums, they put out a call for a mass performance art piece to be held at a specific time and location directly in front of the bank. The invite promised a fun, spontaneous event, a chance to be part of something big and viral. Participants were given simple instructions: wear a specific color, meet at the designated spot, and be ready to perform a basic, repetitive dance move when the music started. To the hundreds of young people who showed up, it was a thrilling game. To the criminals, they were disposable set dressing. At the precise moment the bank's silent alarm was triggered from inside, the flash mob sprang into action. A powerful portable speaker hidden in a backpack blared a popular, infectious pop song. On cue, the gathered crowd, believing they were part of a coordinated joke, launched into their dance routine. The scene transformed in an instant. The sidewalk became a pulsating sea of bodies, singing, dancing, and recording each other on their phones. The noise was deafening, the crowd spilling into the street and blocking traffic. From the perspective of a police dispatcher receiving calls, this was no longer a simple bank alarm. It was an escalating public order crisis with the potential for riots or trampling. Every patrol car in the vicinity was rerouted to control the mob, leaving the actual bank robbery as a secondary, distant priority. Inside the bank, the thieves operated with calm, unhurried precision. With the police and all public attention completely absorbed by the spectacle outside, they had all the time in the world. They didn't need to rush or threaten customers. They simply moved through the bank like official workers, efficiently cleaning out teller drawers and even using specialized tools to open the vault without the need for noisy explosives. The bank's employees and the few customers inside were too distracted by the surreal sight unfolding through the windows to fully process the quiet crime happening around them. By the time the police managed to disperse the confused and now disappointed flash mob participants, the robbers had exited through a back alley, their bags filled with cash, leaving behind a scene of perplexed dancers and a bank that had been picked clean in plain sight. The heist was a chillingly modern success, demonstrating that in today's world, the most effective distraction isn't a lone man with a sign, but a curated crowd of hundreds dancing to the criminal's tune. Where the flash mob heist used the chaos of a spontaneous crowd, our next story demonstrates that sometimes the most effective disguise is not noise, but its opposite, the contemplative, unassailable air of high culture. This operation didn't require hundreds of people. It required just a few with enough audacity to pose not as utility workers or partiers, but as avant-garde artists. In a brazen move that mocked intellectual pretension, this crew pulled off a heist by hiding their criminal labor inside a publicly admired piece of performance art. The stage was set in a European capital known for its vibrant art scene. The target was a bank whose imposing stone facade shared a wall with a small, publicly accessible courtyard. The thieves' plan was a masterpiece of long-form deception. They first needed to gain legitimate, unquestioned access to that courtyard for an extended period. To do this, they became artists. One member of the crew, who had a passing familiarity with sculpture, drafted a proposal for a site-specific installation. They applied for and astonishingly received a small public arts grant and a permit from the city council to install a temporary sculpture in the bank's courtyard. The proposal was filled with impenetrable artistic jargon about interrogating the relationship between financial architecture and public space, and a durational performance of material transformation. To the approving bureaucrats, it sounded cutting edge. To the thieves, it was the perfect cover story. A few days later, they arrived at the courtyard with a flatbed truck carrying a large, abstract sculpture made of welded scrap metal and clay. To any bank employee or passerby looking out the window, the scene was exactly as promised. A group of scruffy, beret-wearing artists assembling a perplexing modern art piece. They erected the sculpture, which was designed with a large, hollow base, and then began the durational performance part of their work. For the next several days, they returned to the courtyard during banking hours. They would sit around the sculpture, sometimes sketching, sometimes applying small bits of clay to it, and often using power tools like angle grinders and pneumatic chisels to texturize the metal. The screaming whine of the grinder and the rhythmic chunk, chunk, chunk of the chisel were, to any observer, simply the sounds of artistic creation. The bank's security guards would make their rounds, nodding at the dedicated artists, completely oblivious to the truth. The sculpture's hollow base wasn't just for show, it was a hidden toolbox and an acoustic baffle. The artists' easels were positioned to block the sightline to the bank's outer wall. With every passing hour, their artistic work was actually the meticulous, slow process of chipping and grinding through the bank's outer wall, which was made of older, softer brick behind the stone facade. The noise of their tools perfectly masked the sound of their progress. They would work for a few hours, then cover the ever-deepening hole with a false panel of brick and mortar that matched the wall's appearance, blending their criminal progress into the sculpture itself. At the end of each day, they would pack up their art supplies, which now included bags of brick dust and debris, and leave without raising an ounce of suspicion. On the final day of their exhibition, they arrived as usual, but this time their performance had a final act. They broke through the last few inches of wall, creating an opening just large enough for a person to slip through, which led directly into the bank's vault room. That night, under the cover of darkness, they returned, moved the sculpture aside, and entered the bank through the hole they had so publicly and painstakingly created. They looted the vault at their leisure and escaped the same way, leaving behind their abandoned artwork as a monument to their arrogance and ingenuity. The heist was only discovered the next morning, when bank employees arrived to find a violated vault and a mocking sculpture in the courtyard. The scheme's success lay in its brilliant exploitation of public trust and cultural deference. The thieves understood that people are conditioned to not question artists, especially when they are operating under the official sanction of a permit. They turned the very act of breaking into a bank into a publicly funded performance. A stunningly brazen heist that proved the best place to hide a crime is often in plain sight as long as you call it art. While the art heist gang used the camouflage of culture and the flash mob robbers harnessed the power of the crowd, our next story features a lone wolf who believed the ultimate escape lay not in blending in, but in literally rising above it all. This scheme, a breathtaking blend of backyard science and sheer audacity, involved a getaway vehicle that was silent, slow, and completely immune to traffic jams or roadblocks. In the annals of bizarre bank jobs, the weather balloon getaway stands out for its Jules Verne-esque ambition and its stunningly simple, if deeply flawed, logic. The plan was the brainchild of a single individual, a man who saw the endless sky not as an obstacle but as an open road. His target was a small town bank with a single critical feature, a flat, accessible roof. His preparations were less like a criminal casing a joint and more like an amateur aeronaut preparing for flight. He acquired a large, high-altitude weather balloon, several tanks of helium, and a sturdy harness. His theory was elegant in its isolation. After the robbery, he would ascend from the bank's roof, catch a favorable wind current, and drift silently and serenely for miles before making a gentle landing in a pre-scouted remote field where a car would be waiting. He wasn't trying to outrun the police, he was planning to completely opt out of the chase. The day of the heist unfolded with a strange, quiet focus. The man entered the bank, committed the robbery with efficient speed, and instead of fleeing out the front door, he made for the stairwell leading to the roof. Once on top of the building, he moved quickly. The balloon was already partially inflated and secured. He topped off the envelope with the remaining helium, connected his harness, and with the sounds of rising panic and police sirens beginning to echo from the street below, he did the unthinkable. He cut the tethers. The initial ascent was likely both terrifying and exhilarating. As police cars screeched to a halt around the bank, their officers spilling out to establish a perimeter and secure the building, the robber was already 50, then 100, then 200 feet above them, drifting lazily on the breeze. From the ground, the sight must have been utterly surreal. A man was floating away from the scene of a crime, dangling beneath a silvery balloon, as calmly as if he were on a carnival ride. The local police were completely unprepared for this scenario. Their training covered high-speed pursuits, hostage negotiations, and armed confrontations. It did not cover a criminal escaping via personal airship. There were no protocols, no air support on standby, and no way to follow. For a few glorious minutes, the plan worked perfectly. The robber had achieved the impossible, a clean, unstoppable getaway. But his brilliant plan contained a fatal flaw, one born of a fundamental misunderstanding of his chosen vehicle. A weather balloon is not a dirigible, it is a passive object utterly at the mercy of the atmosphere. He had envisioned a controlled, directional flight, but what he got was a chaotic ride on the wind. The same breezes that lifted him so effortlessly away from the bank soon proved to be unpredictable and powerful. Instead of carrying him to his waiting escape car, the winds tossed him erratically, pushing him far off his intended course. His serene escape quickly devolved into a desperate struggle for survival as he was carried over forests and frozen countryside, rising to altitudes where the air grew thin and dangerously cold. The escape that had begun with such audacious promise ended not with a discreet landing, but with a desperate crash in a remote, snow-covered field. Injured, disoriented, and miles from any help or his intended rendezvous, the would-be aerial bandit was left at the mercy of the elements. He was forced to abandon his expensive balloon and harness, attempting to trek through the wilderness on foot. Meanwhile, the very spectacle of his escape had made him the subject of a massive, fascinated manhunt. Police and news helicopters, now scrambled, had no trouble spotting the bizarre sight of a giant balloon adrift in the sky and followed it to its crash site. The man was apprehended a short time later, cold, miserable, and defeated not by police work but by meteorology. His heist was a temporary, spectacular success, but his getaway was a catastrophic failure, a stark reminder that even the most imaginative plans are worthless if they can't account for the uncontrollable whims of nature. He had aimed for the stars, but he forgot to check the weather forecast. While the art heist gang hid their crime in plain sight and the lone balloonist aimed for the skies, another crew was quietly developing a tool that felt less like a bank job and more like science fiction. This next heist bypassed physical force and psychological pressure for something far more insidious and technologically advanced. Imagine a weapon you can't see, a threat you can't identify, and a sensation so disorienting it completely shatters your ability to think clearly. This is the unsettling story of the hypersonic sound device, a heist that turned cutting-edge audio technology into the ultimate instrument of confusion. The principle behind the device is as brilliant as it is terrifying. Unlike a conventional speaker that broadcasts sound waves in all directions, a hypersonic sound system uses ultrasonic frequencies pitched so high the human ear can't hear it. These inaudible beams are highly directional, like a spotlight for sound. However, as this focused beam travels through the air, it interacts with itself and the environment in a process called self-demodulation. This interaction miraculously transforms the silent ultrasound back into audible sound, but only at the precise point where the beam is focused. The effect is breathtakingly eerie. A person standing in the path of the beam will hear a voice or a sound as if it's materializing inside their own head, while someone standing just a foot to the left or right hears absolutely nothing. It's the audio equivalent of a laser pointer in a room full of light. A crew of tech-savvy thieves understood the devastating potential of this technology for creating chaos. Their plan was not to threaten anyone, but to unravel the very fabric of reality inside the bank. They constructed a portable version of this device, small enough to be concealed in a backpack or a piece of carry-on luggage. On the day of the robbery, an accomplice would enter the bank and take a seat in the waiting area, casually placing the bag at their feet and subtly aiming the emitter array toward the teller line. The robbery began not with a shout, but with a whisper that wasn't there. The first teller would suddenly jump, spinning around because she clearly heard someone right behind her whisper her name. But when she turned, no one was there. At the next station, a teller would flinch, convinced he had just heard the unmistakable sound of breaking glass from the manager's office. Across the lobby, a security guard would snap to attention, his training kicked into overdrive by the sound of a muffled scream that seemed to come from the vault hallway. In a matter of seconds, the entire bank was plunged into a state of profound and collective disorientation. Employees were questioning each other, customers were looking around in nervous confusion, and the security guard was radioing for a status check on a scream that only he had heard. The entire security apparatus was completely neutralized, its human components distracted by phantom noises and auditory hallucinations. While this symphony of manufactured chaos played out, the actual robber walked calmly up to a now unattended teller station. With every employee thoroughly distracted by their own personal auditory illusions, he had all the time in the world to simply lean over the counter, empty the cash drawers into his bag, and walk back out the front door. There was no need for a note or a weapon. The only threat anyone perceived was the sound of their own name being called from an empty corner of the room. By the time anyone realized a robbery had even occurred, the thief was long gone, leaving behind a bank full of deeply unsettled and utterly bewildered people who couldn't trust their own ears. This heist succeeded because it attacked the most fundamental tool we have for navigating the world, our sense of hearing. It proved that in the modern age, the most dangerous weapon might not be a thing that makes a sound, but a thing that makes a sound only you can hear. Where the hypersonic sound heist manipulated perception in the moment, our 30th tale reveals a criminal plot that played the ultimate long game, exploiting community spirit and historical curiosity to plant the seeds for a robbery that would blossom months later. In a quiet town known for its strong civic pride, a group of thieves masterminded a scheme that didn't just use a distraction, but fabricated an entire local tradition to serve their goal. This is the bizarre story of the time capsule ruse, a heist built on patience, public participation, and the universal desire to speak to the future. The plan was a slow burn, requiring a level of commitment rarely seen outside of epic spy novels. The target was a sturdy, old bank building with a small, well-kept lawn on its side, a perfect spot for a public ceremony. The criminals began by creating a convincing facade. They invented a fake local historical society, complete with a professional-looking website and social media pages filled with benign, auto-generated posts about the town's past. They then applied for a permit with the city council, proposing a wonderful community event, the burial of a time capsule to celebrate the town's heritage. The proposal was filled with touching language about connecting generations and preserving memories for the future. It was exactly the kind of wholesome, positive event that town officials loved to approve. The permit was granted, and the Historical Society advertised the event, inviting families to contribute small items or letters to be sealed inside the capsule. On a sunny Saturday afternoon, the ceremony took place. A member of the criminal team, posing as the society's director, dressed in a corduroy blazer and speaking with earnest, scholarly enthusiasm, gave a short speech about the importance of preserving history. Families gathered around, children clutching handwritten notes and small toys, all completely unaware they were participating in the first act of a felony. With great fanfare, a large, heavy-duty PVC tube, ostensibly the time capsule, was lowered into a deep hole that had been dug by the society's workers. The hole was then filled in, and a small, innocuous plaque was placed on the spot to mark the occasion. The town felt a little more connected, and everyone went home feeling good about their contribution to history. But the truth was far more cynical. The time capsule was no such thing. Buried within that sealed tube, right under the noses of the entire town, was a compact arsenal of breaking and entering tools. A high-powered drill with diamond-tipped bits, cutting torches, lock-picking sets, and even a compact collapsible ladder. The public event had provided the thieves with the one thing they could never have gotten on their own: legitimate, unquestioned access to dig a large, deep hole directly on the bank's property without a single ounce of suspicion. They had effectively pre-positioned their entire toolkit on site, buried and waiting. Months passed, the plaque became part of the urban landscape, a forgotten landmark. The bank's security guards walked past it every day without a second thought. Then, on a pre-selected night, the crew returned. Under the cover of darkness, they simply dug up their own time capsule. In minutes, they had their tools in hand, right at the point of entry. They used the ladder to access a second-story window, bypassing ground-level sensors, and the specialized tools allowed them to quickly and quietly breach the vault. Because they hadn't needed to carry any equipment to the site, they avoided all the risks associated with transporting suspicious bags or cases. They were in and out with a substantial haul before the police could respond, leaving behind nothing but an empty hole in the ground where the town's cherished time capsule was supposed to be. The heist was a chilling success because it was built on a foundation of violated trust. The criminals didn't just rob a bank, they robbed a community of its sense of shared history, turning a moment of genuine connection into nothing more than a cynical means to an end. And finally, we arrive at a heist so perfectly tailored to our modern era that it feels almost inevitable. In a world where online clout is currency and a viral moment can draw a crowd of thousands, one crew saw an opportunity to turn digital fame into a very real payday. This is the story of the social media influencer cover, a scheme that weaponized the very concept of hype itself to pull off a robbery in hyper-connected plain sight. The target was a bank branch that had recently undergone a stylish renovation, transforming its lobby into a bright, open space perfect for hosting small community events as a way to seem more approachable and modern. The criminals identified this new policy as their point of entry. Their masterstroke was in their approach. They didn't need to create a distraction, they could simply rent one. They reached out to the bank's marketing department, posing as the managers of a wildly popular lifestyle influencer, a young woman known for her fashion hauls, luxury brand unboxings, and a devoted following of millions. The proposal was enticing. She would host an exclusive private meet and greet for her top-tier fans right there in the bank's beautiful new lobby. To the bank's marketing team, this was a golden opportunity. It was free, positive publicity, a chance to associate their brand with a trendy, glamorous figure and attract a young, affluent demographic, all at no cost, as the influencers team generously offered to cover all logistical needs. On the day of the event, the scene was exactly as the bank had hoped. A long line of excited fans, mostly young women, snaked around the block. The influencer was there, dazzling and perfectly curated, taking selfies and signing autographs at a table set up near the vault door. The bank staff was overwhelmed, but delightfully so. Managers were handing out branded water bottles and beaming at the positive energy. Security guards were present, but their focus was entirely on crowd control, managing the eager flow of people and ensuring the influencers' safety. They were looking for potential stalkers or overly enthusiastic fans, not professional thieves. The noise was immense, a constant buzz of chatter, laughter, and shrieks of excitement every time the influencer posed for a photo. This controlled chaos was the absolute perfection the criminals needed. Blended seamlessly into the crowd were several members of the crew. They weren't dressed in black, they were dressed like everyone else, holding phones and shopping bags, their faces lit with the same excited expressions. They were just more faces in the crowd, utterly invisible. As the event reached its peak, the team began their operation. Using the crowd's movement as a shield, two members used a copied keycard likely obtained during the logistical setup earlier in the week to slip through a supposedly secure door marked "Staff Only" that had been left slightly ajar to allow bank employees to come and go, helping with the event. The door led to a short hallway and the open vault room where cash was counted and stored. Because the bank was still technically open, the vault door itself was not fully locked, only secured by a standard deadbolt. Inside, away from the frenzy of the lobby, they worked with quiet efficiency. They used specialized bags lined with signal-blocking material to hold the cash, preventing any tracking devices from transmitting a location. They avoided the main vault and focused on the less secured teller cash drawers and the day's deposit bags that were waiting to be processed, swiftly taking a significant amount of money. Their exit was the masterpiece of the plan. They didn't run or look rushed. They simply walked back out into the packed lobby, their now heavy bags blending in with the merch bags and purses everyone else was carrying. They spent a few more minutes in the crowd, even snapping a few pictures, before casually filtering out the main entrance with a group of departing fans. They vanished into the city streets, just more attendees leaving after a fun event. The theft wasn't discovered until hours later, long after the influencer had posted her final thank you story and the last fan had gone home. By then, the criminals were far away, having executed a heist that didn't feel like a heist at all. They proved that in the age of influence, the most valuable commodity isn't just attention, it's the unquestioning access that comes with it, and the perfect camouflage is simply being part of the crowd you yourself summoned. And so our journey through these 31 astonishing tales reaches its end, a tour de force of human ingenuity at its most delightfully unhinged. From the frozen forest where D.B. Cooper vanished into myth to the glittering chaos of a diamond heist buried beneath thumping bass and birthday cheers, one truth echoes louder than any alarm siren. The most successful bank robberies rarely follow a standard playbook. Instead, they succeed by rewriting the rules entirely, leveraging the bizarre, the unexpected, and the profoundly absurd to bypass our most carefully laid defenses. These stories are far more than just crime reports. They are a fascinating window into the human spirit's boundless capacity for creative problem solving, even when that creativity is channeled toward illicit ends. They force us to confront a deeply uncomfortable yet captivating idea. Our entire concept of security is built on anticipating the logical threat, the masked man with a gun, the silent alarm, the fleeing car. But how do you prepare for a robbery conducted by a dog, a heist planned over book club tea, or a getaway made by Bulldozer? These criminals triumphed not by being the strongest or the fastest, but by being the weirdest. They understood that the most vulnerable part of any system isn't the steel of the vault or the code of the alarm, but the predictable nature of human behavior itself. They exploited our innate trust in Santa Claus, our reluctance to disrupt a child's lemonade stand, our desire to celebrate a lottery winner, and our deference to anyone wearing a hard hat or holding a clipboard. The real loophole they found wasn't in the security protocol, it was in the human heart and mind. This collection is a powerful reminder that reality is often far stranger, funnier, and more ingenious than anything a screenwriter could dream up. It challenges our very notions of what a crime can look like and proves that audacity, paired with a truly original idea, can sometimes be the only key you need. These are the stories that linger, not because of the money taken, but because of the breathtaking imagination required to take it. They blur the line between criminal and folk hero, between tragedy and comedy, leaving us to marvel at the sheer inventive nerve of it all. Now we want to hear from you. Which of these outlandish capers stuck with you the most? Was it the hypnotist who allegedly willed the money into his bag, or the grannies who turned a book club into a criminal enterprise? Do you know of another wonderfully weird heist that deserves its moment in the spotlight? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We're genuinely fascinated by these odd slices of history. And if you enjoyed this dive into American oddities, make sure to subscribe and hit that bell for more journeys into the fascinating, the bizarre, and the utterly unforgettable.